Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Compliance Chronicles. Ray's delegated the intro to me today, which I'm not happy about. Um, Start with the CTA, I've been told. So don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, everything that Ray normally says at the start of an episode. And and today's episode is going to follow on from last week. So last week we spoke about a flashback to 2025 predictions and what did we get right, what did we get wrong, what did we learn from 2025. And now we're challenging ourselves again. And this week we're doing the 2026 predictions, so compliance predictions. What do we think is going to take place across regulations, just across the board, in terms of what changes are we going to see, and then the potential impact that that might have on the regulated industries. So was that up to your standard? Was that good enough?
It's supposed to be natural in giving the introduction. So again, welcome to you guys. We are thrilled to have you guys back with us again for another episode. Yeah, it's important that we reach as many people as we can do, and so by you guys liking, commenting, subscribing, turning your notification bells on, and I think you can actually. There's a thing I've been seeing on YouTube now. You can boost a post or boost a video, and so if there's an option for you to do that, please also do that. And yeah, no, like you said, Alex, I think we had an episode last week which looked back at our predictions for the compliance space in 2025, the challenges and all the key changes, and I think we got them quite close. We did quite well, and my belief is that it provided audience value to the audience based on the feedback we received. And so really this is doing the same thing, challenging ourselves again, and hopefully providing insight, but also foresight to the audience again to help them in what we believe these challenges that we are going to face in 2026 look like. So yeah, I think we're due to kind of go through a couple each, as we did this time last year, and then come back at the end of the year or start of next year and see how we fared on this occasion.
See if we scored higher.
Yeah, or lower.
Yeah. So do you want me to start with my?
Yeah. So I think we go straight into it, right? Go straight into the prediction. You go ahead with yours, and then I'll follow with mine, and we'll go back and forward having a conversation about it.
And for everyone listening, we don't discuss these things before, so we try to go into the episodes blind almost. We have a topic, so we knew what the topic was, but we don't share notes, so that way, hopefully, we catch each other off guard, and it'll be a little more.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say actually before we go into the predictions, which is why I asked you to go first, because you duped me. You duped me on the last year's prediction because I've watched back the episodes from last year, and you took the credit for the AI prediction.
I genuinely thought
that was gave yourself 10 out of 10 when actually it was my prediction. So I'm gonna need to retract that 10 out of 10 for you and give it back to myself.
So then I only had one prediction.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Doesn't seem very fair. Yeah, I know. When I watched it back, I agree. Like I don't know why I thought that was my prediction. I think it just sounds like something I would say, like something I would predict. So, well, yeah, I didn't mean to. But that falls nicely into my 2026 prediction because it's AI related. So the one that I put for 2026, which feeds on nicely from that one, is that AI won't just be used by firms and operators, but it will be used against them by regulators. So based on the prediction for 2025, and then what we actually saw was that firms, operators were using AI for everything, or starting to experiment and implement with AI on everything from, customer monitoring, customer onboarding, marketing, all forms and areas of compliance were being used by operators. And I think we'll see 2026, we're going to see regulators I'm just reading my words here to make sure I get it exactly right. I think we're going to see them operationalize their own analytics capabilities. So what I mean by that is if you look at all the information what regulators have, right? We work in the gambling industry, so let's look at most of the gambling regulators. They require operators to provide quarterly, annually, certain amounts of data, right? And they're just sitting on these vast amounts of data, from everything from customer behaviors to complaints data, trends, patterns. They've got all of this information that very few regulators to this point actually really use. They might use it to initiate a conversation, like, for example, I don't know, your annual GGR is significantly higher or lower than previously. So they might initiate a conversation. But actually, with that information, I believe in 2026 we're going to see targeted assessments from regulators based on that information.
Okay, and then what challenge does that bring to the compliance space? Do you think this is? I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll ask another question.
Well, a huge challenge, because so I always say that the thing I always say is that today's regulations are based on yesterday's failings, right? But based on this and based on them having data in real time, actually the regulation almost becomes proactive, because they can use the information there and then to say, well, hold on a minute, Ray and Alex's gambling company for this quarter has seen an increase of 200x on complaints. GGR's grown X amount. SARs have gone through the roof. We're going to do an assessment based on all of this information and go straight in and target you. Now, sometimes there are targeted assessments based on like an individual complaint or an individual piece of data. But I think we're going to see them using all of this data via their own AI platforms, machine learning, to then know exactly where they've got to look
for outliers, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. And do you see this being led by specific industry or industry specific?
Financial services is already a step ahead, right? Like if you look at what HMRC do with Connect. So what they already do with Connect is, and for those people that don't know, the Connect system basically brings in all different forms of data, right? From financial service firms, from companies' house, tax information. It brings it all in and then uses that data, to use the word you just said, to look for outliers. So it goes through the patterns and it looks for outliers. Now, this isn't a new AI tool. This is machine learning that they've had and algorithms that they've had for many years. But they've expanded on that over the last 24 months as AI has evolved. And they're using that now more for targeted assessments for firms. And I think that we're going to see the same in the gambling industry, is that they will follow in the footsteps of people like HMRC and financial services.
And then based on that prediction, how does a company get ahead or deal with that change or that challenge? What would you say is the way to deal with that?
You need to regulate your AI before the regulators regulate you. So does that make sense? You need to if you're
lots of regulation,
lots of regulators. Warren G, Nate Dogg. Yeah, it sounds like. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So if you're a firm, if you're an operator that's using AI, you need to make sure that you have the correct measures in place to regulate your usage throughout your entire business of AI. So it's no good just doing it within the compliance department, but just across the board in your operation. If AI is being used in any capacity, make sure you've got the right governance frameworks, the right levels of oversight, processes, policies, all of the basics that you would have for any other system control, and you're regulating it, you're maintaining control of it. That way, you're taking it out of the hands of the regulator, because when they come in and say, we want to look at this, you're already on top of it because you're regulating it yourself. I think any operator who's experimenting or has implemented AI, but hasn't implemented at the same time the correct levels of oversight, whether that's an AI-focused compliance officer, a technical compliance officer with AI skills, whatever it is, if you haven't done that, then you're going to be more vulnerable. The firms that have implemented all of those measures, i.e. everything from governance down, they'll be okay.
Is there anything that you've experienced then, based on this kind of context you've given? Has there been anything specifically that you experienced this is driving this prediction, that's driving you, or the reason you feel this way?
I mean, I think it's inevitable, because if you look at where AI has gone in the usage through most operations, regulation needs to ramp up. Otherwise,
but have you experienced in your work? Have you experienced anything specifically which is leading you to believe this? Like, I've experienced something where
Well, so we know, for example, in certain compliance assessments, that some regulators, when you provide them with policies, procedures, and documentation, they upload them to an AI tool, and that AI tool is looking for it. Well, the first thing it does is it's looking for anything that's missing. So if you upload, for example, your risk assessment, there are specific terminology, specific frameworks that need to be referenced in that risk assessment. So it doesn't matter in terms of how good it is at that point. It just matters that it's there, that you actually consider it. So, for example, the regulator expects you to take into consideration FATF guidance within your risk assessment, or FATF publications, whatever it is. If you haven't included those words within your own risk assessment, that will flag to them. Now, it's not necessarily they're going to come in and grill you and give you a breach over it. That will then
they probably will, to be fair.
Some regulators probably will, yeah. But what that tells them is we need to delve a little deeper here. So then either when it goes over to the member of staff, they've got their list of things that are flagged to them, they'll go through it, or they'll just ask you about it in an assessment. So that's the first thing, is that you've got to make sure your keywords, terminologies are in there. And the terminologies and keywords, not that you use within your business, but that the regulator specifically uses. So I've seen that firsthand, where a regulator has come in and said, your risk assessment doesn't mention X. And we've said, well, yeah, it does. It's right here. And then they have argued back, well, that's a different terminology, so you need to explain that to us. So I think the specific term was, we had, in a previous situation, we'd had a risk assessment, and we had put in there that the operation does not allow safe bets, i.e. you can't bet on red and black. You can't bet on Arsenal and Chelsea both to win in the same match. Well, you can, but it's going to flag to us that this is a concern for AFC purposes. But they weren't happy that we did not use a specific terminology that they had within their own guidance, because we'd said, no, this is common industry terminology that safe bets aren't allowed. They've said, no, you need to specifically mention that customers cannot bet red and black. Mm-hmm. And then obviously we argued back, well, we can do that, but then do you also want us to mention every safe bet, i.e. that you can't bet on Arsenal to win and Chelsea to win in the same match? Do you want us to cover all of those safe bets? And they said, no, just a reference to red and black. For me, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Just if an industry is using common terminology and it is an industry standard, you should be open to accepting that. And I think we got marked down for that in the end, because they were this particular regulator, who shall not be named, was unwilling to budge.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think it makes sense, right, for the industry, for the operators, but also the regulators to utilize AI, even from an efficiency perspective. So I definitely see that happening. Like you said, we're kind of seeing it anyway in terms of, we discussed last week how law enforcement is using machine learning, artificial intelligence to help them in their own kind of law enforcement investigations. We're looking
what do you mean law enforcement using it? How, in what way?
So the machine learning and AI has been used to help build cases, help and understand data analytics, in order to investigate your more digital type criminality, so blockchain type offences and stuff like this, financial crime based offences, but that are more digitalized. They're using machine learning and AI. So same with HMRC using AI, machine learning to understand and looking to hone in and be able to particularly identify outliers and discrepancies. And
well, do you think that then law enforcement agencies are already using it to identify and look at SAR or suspicious activity reports and transaction report data and look for trends?
So I don't think at the moment. I don't think so. I think it's more. They're looking more actually at how they can use it for investigative purposes, rather than trying to use it to assess the compliance of industries or specific firms.
I think it'd be good to get someone from a law enforcement agency on as a guest to find out how they are using it.
Yeah.
Gets a bit more information, because I'd be intrigued to know.
Yeah.
Because I imagine it is further ahead than we're discussing now. They'll say, "Oh no, we don't have any officers investigating anymore." It's just
well, use your network. I'll try using my network, and we see if we can get somebody on. I think that is a good potential topic for a future episode.
Yeah. So that's my prediction for 2026. I think we're going to see, regulators ramp up their own usage and capitalizing on AI, and then using that in their assessments and enforcement. I think that we're seeing signs of it already, but I think we're going to see it more and more in 2026. Like I said, that first one is, we know that they upload documents and they're looking for keywords and terminologies. We know that they also, certain regulators now expect you to provide data in certain formats. Big part of that is because that format is easier to digest into an AI system. Don't ask me which AI tools are being used. I've got no idea. So we know that is part of it, that it's easier to digest and pinpoint where the assessors should target their questions. So we know that already is in existence, and I just think we're going to see it ramp up. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing if you're on the receiving end of assessment. I would much rather deal with the human that's analysed the information and that is willing to take into consideration responses, because God forbid your responses are fed back into an AI system. I don't know how that'd work.
Yeah, but I think it's a double-edged sword, right? It can help, but can also hinder. But in the same way, like I said, these can be used to assess us or industry. Industry can also use it to ensure they are meeting regulatory requirements. So, yep, I see that coming to fruition. I definitely do. I think that's a good prediction.
You reckon I'm going to get a 10 in 2027?
Well, we'll see. I'm not sure about a 10, but we'll see when we get to review our predictions. So thank you for that. My first prediction, I'll move on to my first prediction. And for me, it's kind of, for me, it feels like an obvious one. Maybe not for everyone listening or watching, but for me, it feels like an obvious one. And this is the prediction that fraud is going to become a frontline AFC and compliance point within regulatory assessments in 2026. My belief, based on what I'm seeing, based on what is happening in terms of advancements of regulatory and legislative updates, is that in 2026, fraud will become an audit grade compliance consideration, an obligation, not merely a kind of a risk management and an operational issue. That in 2026, companies will need to evidence fraud controls and compliant fraud controls in the same way that firms have to do for their AML and their CTF controls, which we haven't really seen before to the extent I believe this is going to happen.
I mean, you see it a bit in financial services, no?
You don't. So I haven't. You don't see many. While fraud happens, you never see a failing for AML reference lack of fraud controls, right? You'll see, cashiers didn't raise, suspicions or lack of training or lack of sanction checks or a lack of clear framework or controls or lack of, appropriate and fit for purpose risk assessment. But you never really see that dialed down into actually the fraud controls were insufficient to mitigate the fraud risks that the business was exposed to. Hi guys, thank you again for listening to the Compliance Chronicles. We really appreciate your engagement. Again, we just continue to ask you to like, comment, subscribe, turn your notification bells on, and get in contact with us if you would like to hear anything in particular. Thank you guys.
So do you think, if we look at like UK gambling as an example, then do you think then that onus from a governance perspective is going to be the MLRO PML, or do you think that's going to fall under general regulatory compliance?
No, I think it will fall into the AML. I think it will fall into the AML, PML regulatory function, also the overall compliance management PML function, and also a governance. So I think it will be governance. It'll be your compliance officer. But also, yes, your AML. I think there's going to be a lot more focus on actually evidencing this in your assessments, and therefore, as a consequence, that AML function is something I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing this in my function as MLRO, in my function as a PML holder, in my function, working across industries. Actually, that there's a lot more need to be involved in conversations around fraud prevention, and building out actually fraud prevention systems, tools, frameworks, controls within the firms that are appropriate to the size and scale and nature of the business. So to give some context of why I think this is the case, you look at the National Risk Assessment, the Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing National Risk Assessment that was published in 2025, June, July times. That report, along with other published reports in that same year, identified that fraud amounted to between 40 to 42% of all financial crimes committed in the UK. So that one offence alone is making up, over a third of financial crime offences taking place in the UK. And that same theme runs into Europe. If you're looking at the European Central Bank, if you're looking at the European Banking Authority, they've also published, reports and data detailing a significant, sharp increase in, the amount of fraudulent acts committed, specifically around your faster payments. And as I said in the last episode, as we continue to digitalize more, moving into faster payments, moving into your more digitalized payments methods, that risk is only going to increase. And then even looking at it more globally into the US, I think it was published that published in a US report that there was a 25% increase in fraud losses in one year on year between 2023 and 2024 alone, taking fraud losses in the US economy to £12.5 billion. So that by default, regulators and legislators are going to have to act and have to take action on actually stemming the flow and stemming the tide. And that's why I think, number one, there will be a lot more scrutiny from an AFC perspective, actually recognizing actually fraud doesn't sit outside as a upstream offense. It also sits on the downstream flow in terms of actually, yes, fraud then allows further crimes to be perpetrated. Fraud is a predicate offense in itself, and it facilitates money laundering, terrorist financing as a process. The fraudulent funds go into a mule account. That mule account goes through to be siphoned off into multiple accounts, and then those funds are utilized to perpetrate whatever continuation of offences that take place. And it's very organised. It's very organised. If you're looking at fraud offences that take place today, they're very organised. I went to a conference not too long ago, which was discussing fraud prevention, how AI has been utilised to supercharge fraud, and you've got some of these fraud rings, some of these fraud centres where people go to work in a suit and they're committing the fraud as if they're actually doing a 9-to-5 job. So it's a very, very organised typology of crime now, and so it can't really be looked at like an opportunist crime and a face of victimless crime. It definitely needs to be dealt in the same seriousness as we deal with money laundering or terrorist financing. So this is one of the main reasons why.
So when you say with the same seriousness, what makes you think that firms aren't treating it with the same seriousness?
Previously, again, the reason why I don't think it has been dealt with the same seriousness is because it's been siloed. It's been siloed away from your AML. It's been siloed away from your counter-terrorist financing piece. So it's been more of a risk management. Fraud is costing us money rather than actually fraud is costing us compliance. If that makes sense. So I think now it's definitely actually not only is it costing us money, it's costing us money, and that kind of leads on to the next piece of why I believe this is going to come to fruition in 2026. Last year, in 2024, we had the payments systems regulation PSR update, which essentially the APP fraud update, which essentially means that now the onus is on firms when there's a fraud, fast payments fraud claim. It's an automatic reimbursement to customers now, to clients. It's no longer actually the burden of proof is on that individual customer or client to prove the fraud took place. This is an automatic reimbursement that's required. So there's a lot more onus now on fraud controls to be able to evidence if they do not believe that they should be subject to this ABP ruling, actually what controls they have in place. And then you had last year around September, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act introduced the failing to prevent fraud offence into the UK, which means again now on a corporate level, companies can be held criminally, corporately liable for failing to create significant and sufficient and effective fraud controls within the company. So these are all things that lead me to believe that fraud will be dealt with in the same way kind of AML, CTF has been dealt with in the past.
So for an MLRO or people of governance in a regulated firm, what do they need to take from this? What do you think they need to be doing differently?
Good question. So if you look at the failing to prevent fraud offence, right, you have who is this applicable to in terms of type of firms? There's a kind of three main categories. One is a turnover of 36 million plus. Another is a balance sheet of, I think, 18 million plus. And the third is you have over 180 employees.
Talking about UK, yeah?
Yeah, in the UK. With that, whilst that is the main criteria, I think people need to take stock of best practice of actually what is it requiring of us. So one of the things that must be done if you are in that criteria is to create a standalone fraud risk assessment, similar to how we have a AML, money laundering and terrorist financing fraud risk assessment. It's to detail out the exposure of all types of fraud that the business is exposed to, the inherent risk of that based on the nature, size, and scale of operations, the controls the firm has, the company has, and then a residual risk, and then a decision of actually where potentially further improvements, further investment needs to be placed. I think that's what firms can do, definitely to be involved in.
But wasn't there a deadline for that already?
So if you're meet those criteria as of the 1st of September 2025, I believe, this is a requirement. Again, I think the enforcement of that will take some time, but I definitely think because of all the factors that are happening around fraud, this will be seen in 2026. I think you will see a firm either in the financial services or in the gambling space who's going through an AFC or regulatory compliance assessment fail for an AFC or an AML finding, which will include lack of fraud controls.
That would be tough if there is a shift on to that focus, because most of the firms we work with, like you say, fraud is almost like an afterthought. Like, yeah, we've got AML, CTF, proliferation financing controls. Fraud comes second to all of that. But then, so do you think then, when you say there's going to be enforcement, so do you think that we'll see, let's again use the UK as an example, we're going to see enforcement action against X operator and they failed on, let's say, the usual suspects, AML and safer gambling controls? You think we're going to see fraud rolled into that as well?
I do. And the reason why I believe that is because with that saying that we like to use, myself and yourself, is when you go into an assessment environment, especially for AML, CTF, consumer duty, safer gambling, it's not tell me, it's show me. It's evidence how your controls are effective, evidence how you've got to the rationale of why these controls are in place. And largely for fraud, there's never really a real clarity of actually why a firm has used these controls or what controls they have in place when it comes to fraud, because you're looking at, a lot of firms dealing with fraud as like a chargeback issue. They're not really dealing it with as a financial crime issue. They're dealing it as a chargeback issue. So I think that needs to shift. That once that mindset shifts, it may be too late for some firms because that shift already happened in the regulatory environment, which I think has happened. So it's about actually firms no longer treating fraud as like a chargeback issue and really treating it as a fraud, as a AML and AFC. But
I think for most regulators, that's going to be really tough for them to prove non-compliance. Because if you look at AFC and safer gambling, right, we say, show us your policies, procedures, great, now we're going to select some accounts and we're going to see them in practice. But with fraud, how do you actually see that? Because any time that you have detected fraud, those accounts in most cases can be closed, right? So what would that even look like in an assessment environment? I've got actually genuinely got no idea how that would look like.
It's something I'm reporting on in the annual reports I do now is doing fraud reporting.
Reporting on, but
Yeah.
let's say put it on the other. We do audits sometimes
Yeah.
and health checks. Let's say we go in and we want to check someone's fraud controls. I don't even know off the top of my head right now how I would check that.
So the key things, for example, how do you prevent synthetic fraud? How do you prevent AI fraud? How do you prevent third-party account fraud? How do you prevent
They're going
fraud?
to tell you that and show you policies and procedures.
But now, like I said, I do no longer believe it's just going to be okay to show us policies, show us procedures.
Okay.
Now they're going to have to show the workings of the controls, evidence in this, that, evidence in the rationale, the logic, the algorithms, the systems used. And if the regulator doesn't align with that, for example, we have controls for this, but actually over a year we had 50,000 cases where people have been able to open an account and do this, soon close, but open an account and do this. There can't be an argument that this is an effective control. I definitely believe that is going to happen in 2026.
So then do you think for that to happen in 2026, we're going to see a requirement for deeper reporting on fraud then? So at the moment, SARS data submitted, MLR annual reports are submitted with X amount of data. Do you think we're going to see that evolve to now including vast amounts of data on fraud detection and prevention?
Yeah, I do. And it's something, because I believe that, I'm forerunning that and creating fraud specific MI within the reporting that comes to me, comes to the business, because I believe this will be the case in 2026. And we talk about this AI, but AI is really supercharging, right? It's allowing fraud to scale at a level that's never been seen before. And the further that AI advances, the greater the scale for fraud to take place. So I don't see any other way than it going this way, and I think rightly so.
I think it's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's causing learning for sure. I think for me, there's a need now to understand fraud controls more acutely, fraud typologies more acutely, and so if you're in that space where you've been focused on AML. Focus on AML compliance, and you had the payments and a fraud manager, or a payments and a fraud team, or a fraud manager, I think there's a lot more synergy that needs to happen now. And rather than waiting for the dictation of it being brought into your remit, is really look at that from now.
I think there's going to be a lot of MLROs that hopefully are listening to this that go away and start looking at courses, training, or just generally getting more involved in the day-to-day of fraud activity, because a lot of MLROs, especially in certain industries, have come up through the ranks of AML, not really touched on fraud, because, like you say, there's always been a fraud and risk manager, fraud and risk prevention officer. So, there's going to be a lot of cross-skilliness needed.
Yeah, I keep saying but I believe that compliance professionals, AML professionals, will now need to be operationally and technically literate, as well as just policy literate and technically and literate around risk. They actually need to be literate in terms of operation.
I'll be out of the job then.
Yeah, because if you look at, and this is not this. I'm only saying this because I've experienced it. I'm saying this humbly because it was only 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't even know what the word API or the acronym API meant. When you're looking at API, what does it mean? Or the acronym, what does it mean, right? But we need to be knowing in detail, how our systems are integrating, how the algorithms that you mentioned before are built into our fraud controls, and actually is it effective to what we need to be preventing?
I think it's a good one, and I hope you're right as well, because it will only do the economy good if that does turn out to be the case. And then we're going to see a lot of cross-skilling.
Yeah, because if you can do it right, you can still then use that risk-based approach. Yeah, if you do it right, then you can still be able to justify what you're having based on on the basis of a risk-based approach. If you don't, then you're going to be held to account of the standards of what the regulator deem it to be, and we know that's very subjective.
Yeah. So step one, get your fraud risk assessment in place.
Yeah.
Like once they do that, sets the wheels in motion.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Thank
We'll
you.
see what you score in 2027. I reckon you're on for a 7.
I mean, I said it. I think it will happen. It's causing me a few sleepless nights because it's causing a lot more work operationally to come through the door. But I think, like I said, as a financial crime piece, I don't think there's any way outside of it.
I think that makes sense. Well, last time you predicted a change in fraud, which was around proliferation financing, you were spot on. So you know your stuff. So let's see.
Yeah. Again, I've experienced it. I'm experiencing it. So that's why I think. That's why I think it. But cool. That's one each now. 1-1. So I think you're on to the second prediction of yours.
Yeah, my next one's a weird one because it's kind of already in place. So I don't know if I'm just cheating a little bit because it kind of exists. So what I've put as my third one is that I think that
your second one. No,
sorry, what did I say?
Is your second prediction? Your third prediction, but it's your second prediction.
My second prediction is around marketing compliance. So what I believe is going to happen in 2026 is that there is going to be an even bigger focus on an even bigger focus on marketing compliance. So right now, similar to what you've just said around fraud, where when an assessment takes place or something's happening within a business, marketing's almost rolled into it. Now, sometimes you'll get direct contact from, for example, like ASA, for example, but there's not one person that's ever really held accountable for that within a firm. And if there is, then that person doesn't normally always sit within compliance. You might have a marketing expert, for example, within your team, within your business, who has worked for years and years in CRM or marketing, but then when it comes to regulatory assessments, a lot of the standards of requirements sit within the heads of like a compliance officer or somebody within the regulated part of the business. But I think what we're going to see is marketing compliance managers become at the forefront of most businesses because.
Is there such thing as that? A marketing compliance manager?
I mean,
is that even a thing?
Some companies have it, okay. Marketing compliance officers. Like normally for anything where there's a risk, there's a compliance officer that's around. But not all of them have it. Like especially within, again, the gambling sector where a lot of our peers work and where a lot of our followers work as well. Marketing compliance officers are few and far between. There are some, and they're very, very knowledgeable, but for the most part, compliance to marketing sits within a PML holder, for example, who is usually on the marketing side of the business. For me, that's like, I don't know, that's almost a bit of a conflict, having somebody on that side of the business. On the flip side, they're usually very, very good at their jobs and good at managing risks. But I think we're going to see that shift where actually marketing compliance officers become more industry standard because the stakes are very high now. I think, you spend millions and millions on campaigns and then you get told to take it down, or worse, you get told to take it down and you're on the receiving end of an assessment off the back of it. That's serious. It costs the business. It can cost businesses a lot of money. So I think we're going to see marketing compliance officers at the forefront. And because of that, we're going to see more targeted assessments around marketing. So usually at the moment, what happens is, if we talk about a typical storyboard, you'll get the advertising standards might be unhappy with a certain campaign that an operator or a firm does. They'll then make the initial contact. But if they also believe that, for one, that might have breached the LCCP, if we're talking about UK compliance, or it's breached the marketing and fair practice terms, then they will also reach out to the other regulators. So they won't just keep it in-house with ASA. They might reach out to the Gambling Commission. They might reach out to the FCA and say, this firm is breaching these rules with their marketing campaigns. Crypto being a big one, right? And then before you know it, you're on the receiving end of an assessment. They want to see all of the marketing campaigns over the last 12 months. They're talking about your sign-off processes, your approval processes, your internal audits for marketing. And I just don't think that can, for much longer, that can sit with anyone outside of a marketing compliance officer.
But then you said they're few and far between in terms of marketing professionals who understand compliance. How does a firm...
No. There are a lot of marketing professionals that understand compliance, but they just don't have they don't sit within the compliance function.
Okay.
They'll normally sit within another department, like within marketing, CRM, advertising, whatever function you have within your business. They don't usually sit within compliance. Usually what happens in most companies is the marketing teams will work on campaigns. So they'll design an advert that says, I don't know, come and smoke 100 cigarettes a day because it's good for your health. It's better than going on a treadmill. And then it will reach the compliance team. After they've designed, they've done the first drafts, it will reach the compliance team and they'll say, what do you think? And the compliance guy will go, no, that's a bit too risky. Then it will go back and forth. Whereas I think now the compliance marketing officers can be more heavily involved right from the beginning. We're looking at designing something. Let's have a conversation. And instead of it being designed, then going to marketing compliance, they'll be there right from the beginning, which again, some firms do have. But especially within like the gambling industry, it is few and far between. I can probably count on one hand the amount of marketing compliance officers that I know in the gambling industry.
Do you see that then more as a change or more as a challenge?
That's a good question. Why can't it be both?
It could be.
I mean, change is always a challenge, right? So I think it's definitely going to be a change because it's not common practice right now that there are marketing compliance officers. Like I have people, for example, within my teams that are marketing specialists that sit within compliance. But I think that they should also be, for example, those people who are in marketing compliance should be the PML holder, should be the policy and process design, should be involved in the entire sign-off process. So for most firms, because that will be a change, that is going to be a huge challenge to implement that because you're going to take away, whenever you put something in compliance hands, there is always that risk that you take away from creativity, right? Because you're going to put in, most compliance professionals will put in measures to safeguard the business. And that does have the impact, if done incorrectly, of stunting creativity. So there is that risk. But I think if you do it right and you get the balance right, most firms will be okay.
So good challenge depends on, I guess, who you have implementing that change.
Yeah, because if you look at the tobacco industry, right? If you look at the 1920s in the tobacco industry, it was just horrific, right? It was like, I think they were actually advertising that smoking was good for you at some stage.
So that's funny because I think I think in the early days of advertising, this was the case. So I have a friend. We actually had this conversation, and he said he could never get his grandmother to stop drinking Coca-Cola. There are other drinks available, just in case it's not advertisement for.
We are not endorsed by Coca-Cola.
But he said he couldn't get her to stop drinking him. And when he asked her why, he was like, because it's good for you. Not knowing that way back when they first advertised it, they advertised it similar to like an energy drink. Like it was an energy source. It was a good drink. It was good for you. And that conditioning meant it was so difficult for her to be reconditioned to actually the truth. Actually, it's not as good as they told you in 1964, whenever it was. And I think that's probably the same when it comes to kind of the whole cigarette piece.
100%. I mean, it's funny how much the health sector gets wrong. Sugar was good. Sugar was the enemy. Then fats were the enemy. Then fats are good for you. Then sugar's not the enemy. It's like some other form of sugar, artificial sugars. It changes all the time. So yeah, I think that tobacco is a big one. If you look, 1920s to 1990s, right? You could pretty much do whatever you want with advertising tobacco. And they did. Like anybody that's watched Mad Men, the series Mad Men, which is basically based on a marketing agency, you can watch I think it was in the 40s and 50s, some of the campaigns that were going out around tobacco. I'm surprised more of the population didn't smoke. I would have smoked based on the advertising that was going out, and I'm completely against smoking.
It's cool. It was cool, right? It was popular. It was
cool.
Good.
It was good for you. You're not a man unless you've got a cigarette in your hand. You're not a real, a woman can't cope with, there's nothing like doing, I think there was one advert that was housework's better when you've got a cigarette in your hand. And there's like a woman hoovering with kids walking around or crawling around smoking. So there's adverts like that, that guys driving around in convertibles with cigarettes. So 1920s to 1990s, you could pretty much do whatever you want. In 2002, there was the UK Tobacco Advertising and Promotions Act, something like that. UK Tobacco Advertising and Promotions Act. And that came in and it changed things a little bit, right? Now you had to be a little bit more conscious of your wording. And what they found was that there was a slight change in terms of how that could be, how companies were advertising it. But companies then, tobacco companies, one thing they did well was they invested heavily in marketing compliance teams. So there wasn't a fair balance. They still had millions being spent on their marketing teams and probably like a couple 100,000 in their marketing compliance teams. But there was a little bit of a change. Some companies were trying to do things different. And then I made a note of it, 2016. That was when the plain packaging regulations came into place. So what we see now, right, which is either plain packaging or a warning, you put them on a packet. When that came into place, there was a 300% investment in marketing compliance within tobacco industry, which is huge. Smoking fell from 20% of UK population in 2011 to 13% in 2019. So you've got, on one hand, regulations tightened. You've got an investment in marketing compliance teams, which has gone through the roof, 300 and something odd percent. And then it's impacted the UK health significantly. That's crazy. So I think we're seeing that now. We've seen the shift in regulation in terms of they're clamping down more on marketing. You cannot take the piss on, or am I allowed to say that? You cannot take the mick on with your marketing. You cannot go overboard.
We'll edit that. We'll edit it out.
We'll edit that out. You can't be targeting vulnerable customers, etc. So with that shift, if you liken it to the tobacco industry, that means there's also going to be the investment in compliance, which is overdue, in my opinion.
Okay. Are firms ready for that?
Most of them are.
Okay.
I think so, because most of the compliance officers, managers, chief compliance officers, whatever their titles are that you speak to in especially in gambling industry and financial services, they have a really good knowledge of what the marketing rules are because they've had to, because there hasn't been anybody else. So I think there is good knowledge within most companies, and also nearly every PML holder for marketing that I speak to is actually really compliance savvy. I don't think anybody, especially within the gambling industry, intentionally goes out to breach rules or take advantage of grey areas. I think it generally is, for the most cases, that if you look at advertising standards and the rules that surround gambling, it is too grey to get it right. Somebody has to always get something wrong for you to learn a lesson. And unfortunately, it's usually an expensive lesson.
Okay. Interesting one. It wasn't one I was expecting to hear. And it's one I'm actually not that sure on. So I'm actually quite intrigued to see how this plays out.
We'll see.
I'm quite intrigued to see how this plays out.
You've got your second one.
Yeah, and I'm quite surprised that you didn't, because I actually created another prediction because I was almost certain that this would be one of your predictions. So I
want to hear this now.
So I'm quite surprised it wasn't one of your predictions. My second prediction is that technical compliance will become frontline in 2026. What I mean by that is that in 2026, technical compliance will no longer just simply be assessed based on your ISO or your SOC 2 accreditations and standards, but they will be put under the microscope. There'll be oversight, reviews, testing of understanding of controls, and testing of the actual automated systems we use. So if you're looking at, as AML, as fraud prevention we spoke about before, detection, onboarding, PEP sanction screening, affordability controls become increasingly automated, there's going to be a need to really evidence how these things operate, how they are governed, how their effectiveness is tested. And for that reason, I believe technical compliance is going to shift from that kind of a policy-driven, data security-driven assessment to really actually evidencing the utility, evidencing the use of how things are configured and whether they are compliant or they meet the compliance requirements to manage, the risk, whether it be.
But don't you think most
sanctions.
CTOs do that? Most chief technical officers.
I think there is an understanding to a degree from CTOs around what is required, but again, I think it's really based on your ISO standards, on your SOC 2 standards, on your disaster recovery, having these things in place. Not really about actually if we're going to onboard a PEP screening tool, if we're going to onboard a sanction screening tool, if we're going to create an in-house affordability or AML alert process, how are we really creating this algorithm? Are we testing it for its effectiveness, and are we continuously testing it for any outages or things like this, for example? So I think that will be something that we're going to see. And the reason why, again, I say this is that financial crime detection prevention is technologically led now. A lot of it is automated. The stat here that I've got here that is in large firms within the financial services industry, it's reported that over 90% of their AML alerts are generated by automated systems. 90%, and for that reason, relying on things like fraud detection, relying on machine learning, AI adoption, which we keep talking about, naturally, I think there has to be a regulatory shift, which will look at scrutinizing systems, not just the outcomes. And so, like I said, in an assessment now, whether it's a regulatory compliance assessment, whether it's an AML assessment, I believe we will see a similar to, I think, the first prediction you made. There will be actually a test of show us why you've chosen this algorithm makeup. Show us why you've chosen this system. Talk us through how it's integrated. I think I was involved actually not too long ago, within the last 3 months, in a independent assessment with a firm. And during the assessment, we were requested by the assessor to talk us through response codes. So a payment had been received, had been rejected. There was a description or a title of that failed payment, and actually we were asked to kind of talk through the response codes.
But for what purpose? Why does the regulator need to know that?
To understand whether the firm actually understands the risk of that payment, and whether it has appropriate controls to mitigate that risk. So if you don't understand what the risk is, how can you mitigate that risk? So I think that's, again, when it comes to the technology piece, it's really understanding whether the technology you're implementing automated in an automated fashion is really doing what it's supposed to be doing, and if so, how do you test that? So I think you're going to see increased case of assessments where regulators are requesting system walkthroughs. I think myself and you had this one time where
we've done that.
Yeah,
system walkthroughs.
yeah, and then
that's quite common now.
Yeah, now it's quite common. So now the more common it becomes, the more knowledge that the regulators have, and then the more ability they have to actually scrutinize and hold to account firms to actually the systems they have in place and how they've got to that. If you're looking at the ISO 42001 established at the back end of 2023, this requires formal AI management standards, and this is more than simply just, do we have sufficient AI controls? It's actually assessing, do we have the continuous governance needed to manage the AI systems and tools we have in place in the business? The more.
So what is your actual prediction that technical compliance officers are going to become going to be subject to more scrutiny and assessments, or that there's just an expectation that across a firm they know more about their technical implementation?
I think both. I believe one.
Can't have two predictions, mate.
It's one prediction.
You're increasing your odds.
It's one prediction, and within that prediction, I'm going to build out. So first things first, I believe we're going to see assessments place more focus in firms evidencing their technological compliance beyond simply like an ISO or SOC 2 standard, really drilling down into algorithms, really drilling down into control testing.
Just on that bit, so again, just to understand, so do you think that's going to be something that the PML for IT is going to have to be prepared to talk through, or firms, for example, I'm talking about the gambling industry, same for like what SMF position, for example, would talk through that for financial services? Do you think it will be IT related that they'll expect that person, or somebody else within compliance?
Good question. I believe it falls in the middle, and it's for the firm to decide who's best appropriate. I believe what's going to have to happen is we're going to have IT professionals who have a better understanding of compliance requirements, and we're going to have compliance professionals who have a more acute awareness of of technical requirements all the way down to code level. So that technical compliance officer role is going to be something that we're going to need to see, or it's going to have to be implemented into businesses more often or more commonly, or as a role, defined role now. Whether we can't just leave it as the CTO who knows a bit about technical compliance but doesn't really know anything about regulatory compliance to the nth degree when it comes to potentially AML, consumer duty, safer gambling. So there needs to be a conduit in between who knows both. And
but do regulators know both?
So what regulators can do, they don't have to have everything. They just have to know that you don't know, if that makes sense.
That's true.
So if they can ascertain that you don't really know, that's enough for them. So we need to be able to show as an industry and as firms that we do know, we can evidence, we can justify. It's so that justification piece. If we're able to justify things through how we're showing the controls, then that's enough for them. They don't need to tell you what. Again, they won't tell you what to do. As you know this, they're not going to say, "Well, you should do this instead." They'll just say, "You don't do."
So do you? But would that lead to or connect to a failing then? And if so, which one? So, for example, I'm the FCA. I audit financial services firm X, and actually during the assessment, I've spoken to the CTO or head of IT and also some other person, and they weren't able to articulate well enough or evidence well enough that they have effective controls from a technical perspective. Therefore, we're going to fine them X. I don't think I've seen that done before.
I feel that's what my point comes into. That I think we're going to see this in 2026.
So you think in enforcement action, we're going to see a failing to comply with, for example, remote technical standards will be more.
Not even so remote technical standards, but also with failing AML compliance. So one of the requirements of the LCCP 12.1 is that you have to have AML controls which are fit and proper for your business. If you cannot justify the methodology, the algorithms, the tools behind the system you have, and again, like I said, because they're going to be much more automated, then you're failing. You cannot evidence that you have the appropriate controls. You cannot evidence that you have the effective controls. Therefore,
that's done now. Why would that be different? That's done now. You have the system walkthrough now, and then you'll go through a variety of accounts, whether this is with the FIU for Malta or whether it's with the Gambling Commission. You'll then do the customer accounts where they'll actually test the controls. So what would actually be different? Because
up until more recently, stuff like, let's say, customer risk rating, customer risk scoring, right? This will be more manual driven. So you have you will do the customers. The case will be kind of drilled down into the things a person or somebody who's manually reviewed the account can determine. However, now there's going to be methodology and algorithms built into automate it in an automated fashion, which will determine the score and give you a score.
So you need to be able to talk through.
You need to be able to talk through all of that.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good one. I'd agree with that.
So that's what I think will happen.
So I've got to learn to code.
Yeah. And not even, like I said, it's learning logic, right? It's understanding logic. If you can't do it, have somebody in compliance that can explain to you in simple terms why this is set up or coded or the logic in this way, to make sure that it actually is actually as you intended. Because what you don't want is, as a compliance professional, as an AML, as a head of AML, as an MLRO, you want this alerts to be constructed in a certain way. You talk to it, and it just comes out. It's configured in a totally different way by the engineering team, by the technical team, because they don't understand. So you need somebody who can understand and articulate plain language, regulatory language into coding language, and vice versa, coding language back into plain regulatory language.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
So that's my second prediction. I think, one, we'll see more scrutiny on actually drilling down into automation, and two, within that is there's going to be a greater need for a technical compliance officer to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to see fraud, technical compliance, marketing compliance, and what was the other one?
AI used against you. It's going to be like, was it like a Terminator?
Yeah, it's coming for us. The rise of the machines.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think so. I think we'll see where we are in 2027. We'll probably get someone in to score us instead of us scoring and marking our own.
I mean, I think if you score me and I score you, I think we can be quite objective.
Well, look,
Just don't steal my predictions this time.
No, we've got it on record now. We'll go through it properly. You complained about the way I done the intro, so you can do the outro.
Outro? Wow, we run out of time.
We're at the end.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
Wow.
time for the outro.
I think it's always important to give context and to give value. That's kind of why we're here. So I think really taking stock of our predictions, why we have given them, and looking at what your business can do today to implement things that would counteract any negativity or negative things happening as a consequence, or again, how you can challenge any of these potential things happening in the first place. So yeah, I think that's really what we hope this episode gives to our audience. And just want to again say thank you on the outro for you guys continuing to follow along with the episodes and the podcast. We look forward to the next one. Yeah, we have some great episodes, like I mentioned last time, coming your way, and bigger and better episodes for the future. So continue to like, comment, subscribe, turn your notification bells on, and if you like the content, don't forget to boost or hike it, whatever you can do on your YouTube or Spotify platforms.
I need to see what this is. I've never.
I saw it somewhere. We saw it somewhere, but anyway. But yeah, thank you guys. Take care until next time.
Thank you.
Bye.